Today's daf is Masechta Avodah Zarah daf Lamed Vav. Be'ezus Hashem, we will begin on daf Lamed Hey and Beis just right after the Mishnah. The Mishnah discussed that there are some things that the Chachamim made a Gzera that will be usher to eat, but it's not usher. It's not prohibited to benefit from it. And one of the things that the Chachamim prohibited was cholav akum, which means milk that was milked by a goy. So the Gemara says like this: cholav l'may necheshla, right? Just right after the Gemara here, just right after the Mishnah. Cholav l'may necheshla. What should we be concerned about cholav? Why did the Chachamim aser cholav that was milked by a goy, especially if it's kosher? If he's going to exchange it, he's gonna. You might think that he's milking kosher milk from a kosher cow, and then he's going to change it out for milk that comes from a tamei animal. Says the Gemara, there's a big difference. You can tell tar animal has white milk. Tamei from a tamei animal, yorek, it's like a little bit yellow. It has a yellow tinge to it. So you can tell if it's not from a cow or from a kosher animal. The imishim aruve, maybe it's going to retain its milk color because it's mostly going to be kosher milk from a cow, but he's going to mix in some non-kosher milk in there. So then the Gemara says we have another test for that. Nakum, let's turn it into cheese. The amamar cholav tar oimid, a milk from a cow from a kosher animal. Oimid can be curdled. Cholav tamei, milk from a tamei animal. Eina oimid cannot be curdled. So we have a simple test. So what's the isser over here? So the Gemara says, if you're going to use the milk for cheese, that would be perfect. You have this perfect test. Here we're discussing the kamcha. You want to use it for eating purposes. So you want to use it for eating purposes or even drinking purposes. So then you're not going to make cheese out of it. So therefore, that you don't have a test to see if it's kosher. Says the Gemara, Venishkol minei koli v'nekam. Let's take a little bit from this sample and turn it into cheese. So we're going to see like this. If it turns into cheese, so then I know it's 100% kosher. If it doesn't turn into cheese, then this mixed into it non-kosher milk. And says the Gemara, even if it turned into cheese, it's not going to be so simple. Even when it's tahar, even tar milk has some whey, that doesn't turn into cheese. So so you can't establish anything, because if you're going to see that there's parts that don't turn into cheese, you're not going to determine that, oh, this is from a non-kosher animal, because even with a kosher animal, you still have some parts that don't turn into cheese. So you can assume it's kosher. Maybe the part that didn't turn into cheese was from a non-kosher animal. So that's why that's not a good test. The ibayasem, if you want, I can tell you. I feel the tema, even if you want to say to kaboyle levina, even if you were going to test this whole thing for cheese, it still wouldn't work. There's still between the crevices, there's some way in the cheese in the crevices, or little holes, and we're going to be concerned that maybe from the chalav tamei that did not curdle, that remained in those crevices. So therefore, Chachamim said that all milk from a goy is non-kosher unless a Jew oversees the milking process. Then we learned in the Mishnah of apas, bread from a goy. If a goy sells you bread, even I know that's kosher ingredients, you're not allowed to eat it. Omar Rav Kahana. So the pashtus, the reason why they aser bread, because if he sells you bread, you may become friendly with him, and then you'll have longer conversations with him, and then it might lead to intermarriage. Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yochanan. Pas loyhutru bebezdin. Pas, they never undid that iser, that prohibition to buy bread in bezdin. Only in an emergency situation, If you have no choice, you buy bread from a goy. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. So Michlal, from this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, I can derive the Ikaman the Shari. There were people that said, wait a second, that this bread from a goy pas akom is permitted. So the Gemara says, and yes, there were people saying that. There were rumors saying that. There were good rabbis saying that. And they based it on a story. Asur Ravdimi, Amar Ravdimi came from Eretz Yisrael. He said, made a comment. Pamachas, there was one time, Yotze Rebbe Lasada. Rebbe went out to a field. The Heidi Goy Milfonov, and a goy in that field who happened to be living, away from people, came up to Rebbe, pas purne ma'afesah, pas that was baked in a huge oven that weighed a saw and about 144 eggs. And it was Rebbe maybe had a desire for that bread. Alma Rebbe said, Kamano paseh, how beautiful was this pas? And Rabbi said out loud, Ma ro chachamim loiser. Why would chachamim try to assess the bread from a goy? Ma ro. So that's what he said. So that ends the story. So the Gemara interrupts the story and says like this: Ma ro chachamim. What Rabbi asked? Why did the chachamim ask a bread from a goy? The answer is mishum chasnas, because it might lead to intermarriage with the goy. So the Gemara says, yes, the Rebbe's question was, where he was questioning the whole concept, the whole gezerah. Why would the chachamim answer it in the field? When a person is on the road, he's not going to develop a relationship with this guy who sells him bread for one time. He's going to be moving on. So there's no chasnas over there. If it's in the city, maybe the chacham said you can't buy bread from a person from a goy that you live next to. But if you're on the road, you could buy bread from a goy. So that was the end of the story. So Rebbe, was questioning the whole gezerah. So the Gemara says, Ksurim Har, and the people felt hit the Rebbe pass. Rebbe permitted buying bread from a goy. V'loihi, it's not so true. Rebbe loihiter esa pass. Rebbe never was mater the pass. But nowadays, it became the halacha that buying bread from a private goy is not permitted, but buying bread from a goyish bakery, so that's permitted, because this was a type of gezerah that most of the tzibur cannot accept, because you need bread and you don't always have a Jewish baker baking the bread. So most of the tzibur did not accept this gezerah anyway. Rabbi Yosef Itemer of Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef and some say Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda said, Loi kach, so that wasn't the story. Ella Omru, this was the story. Pamachas halach Rebbe l'mokem echad. Rebbe went to one place, v'ro pas dochuk l'talmidim, and he saw there was a shortage of bread for the students. Omer Rebbe said, Ein kan palter, is there no bakery over here? Because the people thought Rebbe meant to say palter goy, is there no goyish bakery here? Let's buy some bread. And Rebbe only meant Ella palter Yisrael, a Jewish baker. So people again broke away from this concept of goyish bread. Reb Chelba said, even if, like we said, that Rebbe permitted buying a bread from a goyish bakery, if there was no Jewish bakery there. If there was a Jewish bakery, then Rebbe wouldn't have permitted that. Rabbi Yochanan says, even according to the opinion that understood Rebbe Palter Goy, that it's permitted to buy from a goyish bakery, the Rebbe only permitted in the field, where maybe he took a walk with his students to the field. Ava Be'ir, in the city, you can't even go to a bakery, Mishum Chasnos, because of intermarriage. Okay. Again, we generally are of the assumption that even with a goyish bakery, if it's a goyish bakery and you don't have interaction with the owner, you're buying packaged cookies or something like that, it's generally permitted. Says the Gemara, this person called Ivu, he was so lenient on eating goyish bread that he even from a private seller he would eat goyish bread. So the Gemara says, Iva have a b'rakas v'achal pasa b'mitzra. When Iva was on the fields by the border, so I guess there was very little access to bread. He would eat bread take a bite from a bread from a goy. Amalu Rava said, became Rab Nachman Yitzchak. And when they heard about this, even though Iva may have been a great Talmud Chacham, don't let his, don't communicate with him, and don't let his words enter the base medrash. They're called Ochel Lachman the Aramoy, because he's eating Pas Akum from a Balabayas, not a Palter. So said the Gemara. So now, V'Hashem and Shalahan, the Mishnah said the oil from a goy. The oil from a goy is awesome. So then they came about later on and said, you know what, you're allowed to buy oil that was manufactured by a goy. So who asked oil from a goy, to buy oil from a goy? Shemen, Rav Amar Daniel Gazralav, the last of the Nevi'im, Daniel, he was the one that made the Gezerah, made the edict that you should not buy oil from a goy. Ushmul Amar, Shmuel said, we go to Lamed Vav. Shmuel says, Livosim shall kain to meim oisartem. The reason why they asked the oil from a goy, because he made it in Tamei Kalim, and what was expelled by the Tamei Kalim made the shemen Tamei. So you're really buying oil that is Tamei. Says the Gemara, is that a reason? Does everybody eat tahar oil? I mean, why should the Chachamim aser if someone is not so careful to eat? There's no iser to eat Tamei oil. So why would they aser buying oil from a goy, even if we can assume that it's Tamei? Ella, we say the reason is Zlifosin Shakelim Asurin Isartim. It's worse because the goy is making it from kalim that were used for non-kosher foods, and then he makes oil in that keli, or stores oil in that keli for, let's say, 24 hours. It's going to absorb out the taste of the non-kosher food that's in the walls of the keli, and therefore the oil itself becomes asur. So that's why they said don't buy oil from a guy. Amalei Shmuel Rav. So Shmuel said to Rav, so Bishlam Shmuel, according to my reasoning, that the reason why the Chachamim answered oil from a guy is because we're concerned that he made it in a non-kosher keli. That means lifasin shel kelim asurin isartam. The expelled taste in the non-kosher keli that will enter the oil and make the oil prohibited. So therefore, and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Maser ba'amar, and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Maser said a following statement. Darish Rab Simlai. Rab Shmuel gave a speech, and he says, B'Nitzibin, in the city of Nitzibin. So this Rab Simlai said, shemen, oil, no more, you're allowed to buy oil from a guy, because we can assume that he's not using he's not using a non-kosher keli, and even if he is, maybe it won't give a good taste into the oil, because if it's too old, then the whatever in the walls, the blias that are in the walls, will give a detrimental taste into the oil. So it's not going to ask the oil. And who permitted it? Yehuda based Dinim, Nimnu Olav. They made a new accounting, and they had a vote. Rabbi Yehuda and his Bezdin, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, V'Hitiru, and they permitted the oil of a goy, because they held Noisen Tam Kam Mutter, that if something gives a repugnant taste into the oil, so that doesn't make the oil asur. So therefore the oil is mutter. So whereas it was an original gezerah, and the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi overrode that gezerah. And that makes sense. According to your reasoning, the Amrit, you said Daniel Gosvelav, the great Daniel, the Navin of Daniel made the Gezerah. Daniel made the Gezerah of Asr Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Umabatale. Can Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi come and nullify that Gezerah? Well, now we learned in the Mishnah, Ein Bezdin Yochel Avata Divri Bezdin Chaveri. One Bezdin cannot override the words of another Bezdin. Elon came only Godol Medi if the second Bezdin is greater b'chachma, in intelligence, of dominion and experience. So therefore, certainly Daniel was powered in chachma over Rabbi Yehuda. We would think so, and therefore, so how did Rabbeinu HaKadosh have the ability to override Daniel's gezerah? Answers the Gemara. Who said that? So the Gemara said, and this was Rav saying to Shmuel, Amalei Simlai. You're saying Simlai. Ludoi Ka'amrit. Simlai. Rav Simlai is from Lud, and generally Lud didn't have an appreciation for Talmidei Chachamim. So I think he basically was Rav saying that this whole story that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was martyred never happened. Fake news. So the Gemara says, people who come from Lud, they degrade whatever the Chachamim had to offer. Maybe they thought of themselves, the people of Lud thought of themselves as too smart. Amalei, so Shmuel said, Eshlachlei, can I tell Rab Simloi what you said? Ichsif, so Rab was quiet or hesitant. Maybe it's true. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda Nasi overrid the Gezerah of Shemen. So the Gemara says like this. Amar Rav. Rav says, again, Rav was the one that said that the source of Shemen becoming Osir, oil, was derived from Daniel. Daniel made it up and initiated it. So the Gemara says like this: Im hein lo darshu anan lo darshin. If nobody reads psukim, we shouldn't read psukim. But the pasuk clearly says, "But Yosem Daniel aliboy." Daniel thought about in his heart, Ashley's goil, that he should not be repugnant from the pas bag melech, the bread of this food bag melech, uvayayin mishtov, and the drinks and wine and his drinks. Then what's drinks? The pasuk is speaking about two types of drinks. Echad mishnayim, a drink of wine. The echad mishnayim, the liquid of oil. And Daniel was put it on his heart that he shouldn't be making gzeira, that people shouldn't have these kind of interaction with goy, buying from them their wine and buying them from them their oil. So that's the pasuk seems to imply that Daniel really made it happen. So Rav says, Ali Boisab. Daniel thought about it in his heart, and he taught Gans Klal Yisrael not to buy oil from a guy. Shmuel read the pasuk, Ali Baisam. He thought about it in his heart, but did not teach it to any other Jew. There's the Gemara. The Shemen Daniel Gazar. The Shemen Daniel made the Gzeira. The Shemen oil Daniel made the Gzeira. Bali said, Avimi Nasonim Ishmei Rav, in the name of Rav. See, if Rav said Daniel made the Gzeira, there's another statement in Rav that said Pitan, the bread of a goy, Vishnamnam, the oil of a goy, Yeinon, the wine of a goy, Uvnoi say had, and we're going to learn what that means, but having Yichud, being secluded with Goyish girls, Kula Mishnoina also Dabahe. That's from the 18 things that Hillel and Shammai made it edict, as we learned in the beginning of Masechta Shabbos. So we see that the oil did not come from Daniel, it came from Hillel and Shammai. That's what Rav said. Do you want to understand Rav? Also Daniel, Gazar, V'loi Kibal, Daniel made the Gezerah of the oil and nobody accepted it. Also, Talmidei Hillel v'Shammai Ugzir v'Kibal, the students of Hillel and Shammai got together, and they both made the Gzeira, and it was subsequently accepted by Klal Yisrael. It came Ma'asudus the Rav. Then what did Rav say? Testimony. Oh, Daniel made it. If it was never accepted, then there was no Gzeira of Shemen from Daniel's time. Ella, to compromise, he was like this. The Rav said Daniel made the Gzeira of oil. Al Daniel Gzar al Be'ir. Daniel made the Gzeira in the city. Even in the fields, you should not take buy oil from a guy. So there was a subsequent an appendix to the original Gezerah by Shammai and Hillel. Says the Gemara, if you're going to say that Shammai and Hillel made the Gezerah of oil, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Heichem also the Mishnah to counter the Talmud Shammai v'Hillel. And how could Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi undo the Gezerah of Shammai and Hillel? But now we learned in the Mishnah, Ein Bezdin Yochel Avatal Divrei Bezdin Chavera Elam Ken Gadol Hamenim B'Chachma V'Minyan. One Bezdin cannot overdo the Gezerah of a previous Bezdin only as they are greater in Chachma, in intelligence, and a minyan experience. And I wouldn't say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was greater than the students of Shammai and Hillel, who lived many years earlier. Another thing, Rabba Baba Choram said in the name of Yochanan regarding those things that were invented by Shammai and Hillel, those 18 things, everything, every person, it's possible to undo what another court established. So if another court deems that invalid, they could undo the Gezerah of a previous court. Chutz, the only exception to that is Mishmoina also Dover, from the 18 things. Even if Eliyahu and his court comes, and Eliyahu is probably in the greatest court, and they want to undo what Shammai and Hillel did, Ein Shaimah, you can never listen to them. So how did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi undo the takana of the students of Hillel and Shammai regarding the Isser to buy oil from a guy? Says the Gemara, the answer is like this. Rav Sharshi explained, Mata, what's the reason why you can never undo something that was from those 18 things that were established by Shammai and Hillel? Hoyel upashat isur b'Rav Yisrael. Since most of Klal Yisrael accepted it, so therefore it can never be undone. Shemen, the oil gzera, loy pashat isur, did not spread. Some people just couldn't accept it, b'Rav Yisrael. The Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Yashu Rabbeinu Batku. Our rabbis had a meeting and they investigated al shemen regarding the isur to buy oil from a goy, shloy pashat isur b'Rav Yisrael, and they saw honestly that not Gans Klal Yisrael, most of Klal Yisrael did not accept the Zarah. So then they relied on the words of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and the words of Reb Lazar bar Tzadok, both of them said, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and Reb Lazar bar Tzadok said, Ein goizung zera al hatzibur, you cannot make decree an edict on the tzibur, on the community, Ellen came only if if it's possible for most of the congregation to accept it. And for some reason, oil was a necessary product, and yet it couldn't always be attained by most people from Jewish manufacturers. So therefore, nobody really accepted it, and that's why Rebbe said, "Okay, we don't have a gezerah buying oil from a goyish manufacturer." The Omer Rab Ado Barahava, Rab Ado Bar said, "Micro, where do you see a passing that if there is a gezerah that most of the tzibur cannot accept, you just undo it?" The pasuk says, we go to Amud Beis. The pasuk says in Malachim, you make a gezerah, you make an edict, and if whoever violates that edict will get a curse. So it's a gezerah derabbanan. And then the oisi atem koivim, then you steal from me. But you violated. Hagoy kulei, the entire nation violates their own edicts. So that was the pasuk. So the Torah, the pasuk says, only types of edicts that are that were accepted by the nation entirety, so then, or most of the nation, then God is upset if you violate such a gzeira. Eloi, but if it was never accepted by Goy Kuloi, so then Eloi, Hashem's not so angry on that because then it wasn't accepted, and therefore it's understood that that Klal Yisrael didn't accept it, and therefore it can be overturned. So that's why there's no the buying oil from the oil manufacturer, a goyish oil manufacturer, is permitted. Gufo, we learned. Rav said, Pitam, Vishamnam, Yain, Uvnoisem, Kulam Mishmaina Asa Davarhe. They are from the 18 edicts that we're not allowed to buy goyish bread, you're not allowed to buy goyish oil, you're not allowed to buy goyish wine, and you're not allowed to, the Gemara understands now, you're not allowed to marry a goyish lady. Says the Gemara, what is the story about goyish women? Can't be that you can't marry them, because that the Torah tells you that. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak said, Gozru al b'neisem nidos me'ari saisasam. A goyish girl, as soon as she's born, even though she doesn't see any blood, now even if she's older, a goyish girl that sees blood, it's not tummy neither. Neither was an expressive tumah only for Jewish girls. But they said that a goyish girl, a little infant, who obviously didn't see blood, she has a din nida. So if a yid touches a goyish baby girl, he is tamei nida. That's what Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said. Ugneva mishum de Rav Omar, and Geneva in the name of Rav says, nice name Geneva, Kulan mishum avodah zarah goes mehem. They all were geyser that you might come to do avodah zarah. All leads to idol worshipping. So that's what it says. This is all because it might lead to idol worship. So if you have something to do with their families and they're always around in their house, you might come to eventually worship their idols. Ki also Rav Acha bar Adam Rabbi Yitzchak said, Gozru al pita mishum sham. So they said that you shouldn't eat the goyish bread, you might eat goyish oil. That's why they said don't eat goyish bread. Says the Gemara, my ulman d'shemen mi pas. What is more? Why is oil more stricter than bread? Where you geyser on bread, so that you might not come to eat oil. Ella, no. Al pita mishamlam. Rav said like this: they would geyser not to eat the bread of a goy, not to eat the oil of a goy, mishum yainim, because you might come to drink with the guy. Val yainim on their wines, mishum b'noiseyem, because of their daughters. You might marry their daughters. Let's take it for what it says. Val b'noiseyem, and marrying their daughters would lead you mishum davar acha to do avodah zarah. Val davar acha mishum davar acha, and if you can do one thing, it will lead to something else. We're going to see what that means later on. But b'noiseyem, the Gemara wants to understand the word of Rav, that the whole thing is that you might come to marry them. So therefore, they were going not to marry them so that you won't come to do avodah zarah. Again, they were goyzer, according to the reading of Rav, don't marry a goyish lady because you might come to do avodah zarah. Says the Gemara, don't marry a goyish lady, but the same deraisi, isn't that written in the Torah? Except the pasuk says, you're not allowed to marry a goyish lady. Answers the Gemara, deraisi mina Torah zayin umas. Only you're not allowed to marry only a goyish lady from the 7 nations, Chiti, Amoria, Chivi, Vayvusi. So all those Gigashi, so all those you're not allowed to marry. Avashar but maybe there's no is in the Torah to marry somebody from the other nations of the world. Because maybe the Zayin Umas were so addicted to Avodah Zarah, the Torah only asked them, but not any other nation. So these Chachamim came, Ugzor Afil L'Shar Ubas, they made a Gzera that even other nations you're not allowed to marry. Says the Gemara, that's not true. The rabbis call him serious. The Torah indicates and adds a statement that if you marry into their family, if a boy marries a goyish girl, she's gonna convince him to do avodah zarah. So it doesn't matter who you marry, even if you marry somebody who's not from the 7 nations. According to Shimon ben Chai, it's an asur deraisa to marry somebody from the 7 nations. Answers the Gemara, El deraisa min deraisa ishus derech chastus. You're not allowed to marry a goyish lady. And the Zera was that even just a one-time thing to have a fling with a guy, that would be asur midrabona. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Znus. Nami Beis Din Hashem Gozri, the Bezdin of Shame made a Gzera. The pasuk says, by Yerme Yehuda Haitzi Uho V'Sisarei. Yehuda was convinced that his daughter-in-law Tamar did znus, and he decreed that she should be brought out and burned alive. She only did znus; she didn't marry anybody else, but she was a Jewish person. And therefore she was Mizana. So Yehuda says she gets the burning, that she should be taken out and burnt. So we see that it wasn't a later Gezerah, but early in the Chumash you find that you're not allowed to do znus with a guy. Ella, so Gemara wants to say, Doi Rais Minatira, Goy Haba Abbas Yisrael, if a Goy marries a Goy that has relations with a Jewish girl, the Mashcha Basrei, that's also Minatira. So they didn't want Tamar to have relations with a Goy. So that was also Minatira. Abba Yisrael Haba Goya, but if a regular Jew, male Jew, has relations with B'derech Znus, with a Goyish lady, loy, that wouldn't be also midrabanan. That wouldn't be also from the Torah. But also, and they came, the rabbis came, Gzar Afila Yisrael haba al goya, that even a Jew that's mazana with a goya would also be asar midrabana. Okay, because the original Xer was because a goy that has relations with a Jewish girl, she's gonna right away be attracted to him and do what he says, do Avodah Zarah. A Yisrael habal goya, but if a male had relations with a goya, he won't necessarily do Avodah Zarah. So minat Torah in the Bezdin Shoshem, they didn't make this gezerah. And now we said no, that you're not allowed to have relations with a goy at all. That's what the rabbi said. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Yisrael habo al goya, Yisrael that has relations with a non-Jew, halach l'mesh Sinai he. That's halach l'mesh Sinai that you're not allowed to do. The Omamar haboy l'aramis, someone has relations with a goyish lady. This was last week's parsha. Kanoim, someone who's moved to anger. Poigi boik is allowed to kill him. So we see that you're not allowed to have if the halacha says Mishinai says that you're allowed to kill that person. So we see that it's asur b'daraisa. Answers the Gemara, daraisa b'far hesya, uchamaisa shahaya. Midaraisa, it was asur in public, like the story of Pinchas, with the story with Zimri. He did it in public, being bizan with Cosby. And the rabbis came in the later generations. In Gaza, I feel a bit say that even privately, you're not allowed to have relations with a goy. Says the Gemara, but sin nami bezdino shel chashmonoi gazri. It wasn't a gezerah in the times of the Tanoim, time of Shammai Behillel. In private, even in the time of the Greeks, when the chashmonoim had their own court, they made a gezerah. You're not allowed to be with a goy. Omar, he said, Bezdin shel chashmonoi gazu Yisrael abal goya. If a Jew has relations with a non-Jewish woman, chayev, he's liable. Mishum nishka, he did 5 sins. They're not really 5 sins because they don't apply by a guy, but it leads to things. Once you start being promiscuous in znus, nashka stands for nida, Rabbanan, of course. It's shivcha because you might come to marry a maid, and of course it's a goya. It's as if you got married to her, and ish, because it's as if you're doing snus with an HSS, because by Goyim, they also have the concept of marriage. And if a person has an affair with someone that's married, that's like an HSS. That was the, and Kiyasa Rabin Amam Mishum Nashgas. You get Nashgas. It's as if you are over Nida, Shivcha, Goya, and Znus, because if you're a Kohen, you're not allowed to have relations with a Zoina. And having relations with a Goy is like having relations with a Zoina. So the bottom line is, we said that the Shammai and Hillel made this gezerah that you shouldn't take, the way Rav explained it, you shouldn't have the bread and oil of a goy because you might come to their wine. And you shouldn't have the wine of a goy because you might come to marry or do snus with their daughters. But we're seeing that it's always usher. It was always usher even before Shammai and Hillel came along. Answers the Gemara. He goes with Bezdin Chashmonoi Bia Aval Yichud Loi. Bezdin Chashmonoi, yes, said you're not allowed to have relations with a goyim, with a non-Jewish woman. Aval Yichud, just to be secluded with her, Loi. And privately, that's not a gezerah. But also Inu and the Shammai and Hillel came and gezer Afila Yichud, even to be secluded with a goyish woman is also asur. Says the Gemara, Yichud, to be secluded with a woman alone, Name Bezdin Shel David Gazri. That came from Bezdin of David HaMelech. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ba'isa Shah Gazra Yichud. Because of a special story in Tanakh, David HaMelech made a gezerah, you shouldn't be alone with a woman. Answers the Gemara, Hamri Hasan Yichud Bas Yisrael. David HaMelech was geyser the Yichud of having relations with a Jewish girl. Yichud the Bas Yichud the Goya, to have relation, to not have relation, to be secluded with a Jew. That's what David HaMelech, to be secluded with a Jewish girl. That's what David HaMelech made a gezerah. Abba Yichud the Goy, to be secluded with a non-Jewish girl. Loi, there was no such gezerah. Also Inu and Shammai and Hillel came, Gazru, and they made an edict. I feel Yichud the Goya, that you're not allowed to be alone with a Goyisha lady. Says the Gemara, it might end up in social media. Yichud the Bas Yisrael Daraisi. Now the Gemara asks, then why did David HaMelech make a gezerah that you're not allowed to be alone with a Jewish girl? That is from the Torah. Yichud is from the Torah. Dam Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoyad Tzaddik. Remez liyichud min haTorah minaim. Where do we see the Torah hint to the isser of being secluded with a woman by yourself? How do you know it's asr? Shenema, the pasuk says, Ki yisischa achicha ben imecha. The Torah says that your son of your mother, it could be son of the father. Chi ben ein meses. Can you be enticed to do avodah zarah from your brother, from your mother's side, ben av ein meses, but the brother from your father's side will not incite you to do avodah zarah? Why does the Torah say ben imacha, son of your mother? So Ella, the Torah is hinting like this: ben misyachad imimai. A son could be alone with his mother. There's no iser yichud. But nobody could be alone with any of the ervos in the Torah. So we see that yichud with a Jewish woman is awesome in a Torah. So how could you tell me that David and Melech made the Gezerah? And says the Gemara, yichud daraisa deishish. Mina Torah is only prohibited to have seclude with a married woman. Also, David Gazar Afila Yichud Pnuya. And David made a Gezerah that you shouldn't be alone even with a Jewish girl that's unmarried. That was the Gezerah of David Amelech. Also, Talmidei Beishami and Basilim, that the students of Beishami and Sila said, Gazar Afila Yichud the Goya, even with to be alone with a non-Jewish woman is also asar. Yichud with a Goya was the laws of edicts that were established by Shammai and Hillel. So again, when we go back to what Rav said that they made a Gezerah on you're not supposed to have their wine, their oil, breads and oil, because you might come to drink their wine. And if you're going to come to drink their wine, you're going to be alone with their unmarried or married girls. And then if you're going to be alone with them, it might lead to davar acha, which we said means doing avodah zarah. So we'll continue with this discussion, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow.